For as long as I can remember, I've been the one who did everything right. I worked hard, kept my head down, and did what was expected of me. But no matter how much I tried, I was never quite good enough in the eyes of my family. Sophie, on the other hand, always had it easy. She was their favorite, the one who could do no wrong. We were close growing up, or at least I thought we were. But as we got older, something shifted. Every family event, every holiday, every celebration, it was always about her. She was the one receiving all the attention, the one who seemed perfect, while I was the one always in trouble, always disappointing someone. It wasn't that I was a troublemaker. I wasn't, but if anything went wrong, I was the first to take the blame. Sophie never had to face that. Life came easy for her. She always had things handed to her, while I was left scrambling to prove myself to everyone, constantly seeking approval. But I tried not to let it bother me. Maybe it was just how things were. Then, one day, Sophie called me. She needed a place to stay for a couple of months. I should have seen it as a red flag, but I didn't. This was my chance to spend some real time with her. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I helped her out, she would realize all that I had done for her over the years. At first, it wasn't so bad. Sophie stayed with me, and things were peaceful for a while. But as time went on, I started to notice things that bothered me. She'd leave for work every morning, and by the time I came home after a long day, the apartment was a disaster. Dirty dishes piled up, her shoes were scattered across the living room, and her clothes were everywhere. I'd ask her about it, and she'd shrug it off, claiming she was tired or had too much on her plate. I tried to stay calm. After all, she was my sister, and family was supposed to stick together, right? But deep down, I was starting to resent the situation. She was living here rent-free, taking up space, while I was struggling to keep things together. I had bills to pay and my own life to manage. Meanwhile, Sophie treated my home like a hotel, with no regard for how much I was sacrificing just to make this work. As the weeks passed, the situation only got worse. It wasn't just the mess anymore. It was the sense of entitlement that Sophie seemed to have. One evening, after another exhausting day at work, I came home to find her sprawled out on the couch, casually watching TV. There was a half-eaten pizza box next to her, and the living room looked like it had been hit by a tornado. I could feel my blood boiling. I didn't say anything right away. I was tired of being the one who always had to speak up, always the one to make the hard decisions. But then she said it casually, as if nothing had happened. By the way, Mom and Dad want me to stay a little longer. They're fine with it, so I figured I could crash here for another few months. Another few months? I froze. I had already been doing this for over 4 months, trying to balance my own responsibilities while letting her live here rent-free. And now, it seemed like my family was perfectly fine with this arrangement. I could feel my patience running thin. I had given her a place to stay, tried to be the supportive sibling, but it felt like I was the one being taken advantage of. The resentment I had been suppressing for so long was starting to boil over. I couldn't just keep living like this, feeling invisible in my own home, feeling like everyone around me was getting everything they wanted while I struggled to keep it all together. I had to do something. The next day, after a long shift at work, I came home to find her lounging on the couch again, acting like nothing was wrong. The mess was still everywhere. This time, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Sophie, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady, though I could feel my frustration bubbling under the surface. She glanced up at me, still glued to the screen. "What's up?" she asked, her tone casual and unbothered. "I can't keep doing this. You've been here long enough. You need to move out," I said, my voice a bit more forceful than I intended. She blinked in surprise, then let out a little laugh. "What? Are you serious?" she asked. "You want me to leave?" "Yes," I replied, my frustration pouring out. "You've been here long enough, and I've asked you to pitch in, but you don't. You don't clean up after yourself. You don't pay rent, and I'm struggling to pay my own bills while you live here, without a care in the world. I've had enough." For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her eyes narrowing. Then, in her usual carefree tone, she said, "Well, you don't have to be so dramatic about it. I was just going to stay a little longer, until I figured things out." "No, you weren't," I snapped. "You were planning to stay as long as you could, taking advantage of me and my space. I won't let you do that anymore." Her face twisted in disbelief, and then she stood up quickly, snapping, I'm not some charity case, okay? I'm just trying to get my life together. Why do you have to make everything so difficult? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I'm not making it difficult, Sophie. You are. I've been nothing but patient with you, but you've crossed the line. It's time for you to leave. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to figure out her next move. But instead of arguing, she just stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. The days that followed were tense. Sophie barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was always with sarcasm or a backhanded remark. The peace I had once tried to maintain was gone, and the air in the apartment felt heavy. I could feel the walls closing in, and honestly, I didn't know how much longer I could take it. And then, the inevitable happened. Mom called. I didn't answer at first. I wasn't ready to deal with the guilt trip I knew was coming, but after a few missed calls, I decided to pick up. "Why are you doing this?" Mom asked softly, her disappointment evident in her voice. "Sophie just needs a little more time. She's struggling." I held my breath, trying not to let her words shake me. "You've always taken her side, haven't you?" I said, my voice quieter now, tinged with years of hurt. "No matter what, she's your perfect little girl, and I'm just the other one, the one you never had time for." Mom sighed on the other end. "That's not true. You know we love you both, but Sophie needs us right now." "I've been patient long enough," I said, my voice steady. "She doesn't clean up after herself, she doesn't pay rent, and she gets everything handed to her while I'm left picking up the pieces. I'm done sacrificing everything for her." There was a long silence on the phone. Finally, Mom said, "We're just asking for a little more patience. Can't you be more understanding? I can't keep doing this anymore," I said firmly. "She needs to learn how to stand on her own. I'm kicking her out." Mom's voice was almost pleading now. "Please, don't do this. We're family." "I'm not turning my back on her," I said, my voice hardening. "I'm doing what's best for both of us." I hung up before she could say anything else. I knew it was the right decision, but even then, I felt the weight of the situation. The relief I had hoped for didn't come immediately. It was like something had broken between us, between me and Sophie, and between me and my family. The strain was palpable, and I wasn't sure what would happen next. The next few days were a blur of tension and frustration. The air in the apartment felt thick with unspoken words, and the silence between Sophie and me was deafening. She barely looked at me, and when she did, her gaze was cold, filled with a mixture of disbelief and contempt. I could feel the distance growing between us, and honestly, I wasn't sure how much longer I could stand it. It was strange, living with someone who used to be your best friend, but now felt like a stranger. Sophie and I used to have fun together, laugh about stupid things, share our little secrets. But all of that seemed like a distant memory now. The more she stayed here, the more I realized that I wasn't just angry at her, I was angry at my parents too. They had let this situation get so out of hand. They had let her take advantage of me, and they had done nothing to stop it. They had always been there for Sophie, but when it came to me, it was as if I was invisible. It was like my efforts, my sacrifices, didn't matter. I spent my days working long hours, coming home exhausted, only to find that the apartment was still a mess. Sophie would leave her things everywhere, as though nothing had changed, as though she hadn't been asked to contribute in any way. I'd walk into the living room, only to see her sprawled out on the couch, glued to her phone or watching TV, completely oblivious to the fact that I was struggling just to keep everything afloat. One afternoon, I came home to find Sophie sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. The moment I walked in, she didn't even look up, not even to acknowledge my presence. I stood there for a moment, watching her. The anger I had been holding back for so long started to rise again, and I could feel my hands clenching into fists at my sides. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Maybe a change, maybe an apology, but what I got was nothing. She finally looked up, her face impassive. "What?" she asked, as if it was a routine question. "What do you want?" I tried to stay calm, but it was getting harder. "Sophie, we need to talk," I said, my voice barely steady. She didn't respond. Instead, she let out a heavy sigh and got up, grabbing her jacket. "Talk about what?" she muttered under her breath. "You kicked me out already, so what's there to say?" I watched her walk toward the door, my frustration boiling over. "You're not just a guest here, Sophie," I said, my voice louder now. "You've been living here for months, and you haven't done a single thing to help out. No rent, no cleaning up, nothing. I've been struggling, and all you've done is take. I can't keep doing this." She stopped, her back to me, and for a brief moment, I thought she might say something, apologize maybe. But when she turned around, the look on her face wasn't remorse. It was annoyance. "You're really going to act like I'm the one at fault here?" she said, rolling her eyes. "I'm just trying to get my life together, and you're acting like it's my fault, everything's falling apart." I could feel the weight of her words press down on me, but I refused to back down. "I'm not the one making things difficult," I said. "You are. You've had everything handed to you your entire life, and now you're just expecting me to pick up the pieces. I can't do that anymore." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability. "You don't know what I'm going through," she said, her voice cracking just a little. "You think I like living like this? You think I enjoy depending on you?" I shook my head. "It's not about that, Sophie. It's about you not taking responsibility for yourself. You've been living here rent-free for months, and all I've asked is that you help out. But you don't. You expect everyone to just pick up after you." Sophie stood there for a long time, her face twisted in confusion and hurt. She was quiet, which was unusual for her. Then, finally, she spoke again, but this time her voice was softer, more resigned. "I'm sorry," she said, her shoulders slumping. "I didn't realize how much I was taking from you. I guess I've been too caught up in my own problems to see it." For a split second, I almost believed her. I almost thought that maybe, just maybe, she had learned something from this. But then, just as quickly, that thought vanished. Sophie had never been good at following through. She had never been good at truly changing, and deep down I knew that her apology was just another attempt to manipulate me. "I appreciate the apology," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check, "but it's too late. I've made up my mind." Sophie opened her mouth to say something, but then stopped herself. She seemed to be thinking, weighing her options, and then, without another word, she grabbed her bag and left the apartment. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stood there for a long time, trying to process everything that had just happened. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, but at the same time, I felt empty, like a piece of me had been ripped out. Was this really the end of it? Was I doing the right thing? The next few days were filled with a strange quiet. Sophie didn't come back, and there were no texts, no calls. It felt like the world had shifted, and I was left in an unfamiliar place, uncertain about what was next. I had made my decision, but I didn't know if I could really go through with it. Had I done the right thing? Had I been too harsh? I didn't have any answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living in the same cycle, constantly sacrificing for someone who didn't appreciate it. This time, I was choosing myself, and that thought brought me a sense of peace, even if it was fleeting. Then, a few days later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. "Can we talk?" the message read. "It's about Sophie. She's really struggling, and I think you need to give her more time." I stared at the text for a long moment, my heart sinking. I knew what this meant, another attempt to guilt trip me into taking Sophie back. I took a deep breath and put my phone down. I didn't have the energy to deal with it right now. For once, I was going to focus on myself and not let anyone else pull me back into their drama. I had already given too much. I didn't respond to my mom's message. Instead, I sat in the silence of the apartment, feeling the weight of the decision I had made. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The next morning, I woke up to another message, this time from Sophie. "I'm sorry," it read. "I know I messed up. I shouldn't have taken you for granted. I just don't know where to go." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to respond, wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, but I knew better. She had said those things before, and nothing had changed. I didn't reply. The silence stretched on, and I realized that maybe, just maybe, this was what peace felt like. The days after Sophie left were strangely quiet. It was almost too quiet, like the calm after a storm. For the first time in months, the apartment felt like mine again. The clutter was gone, the tension had lifted, and the space that had once been filled with frustration now felt almost peaceful. But it was a quiet that I couldn't enjoy fully, not yet. Every time I walked through the apartment, I was reminded of everything that had led to this moment. Sophie's absence left an emptiness that I hadn't anticipated. For years, I had been the one who kept the peace, the one who always made sure everyone else was okay, even if it meant ignoring my own needs. But now, standing in the silence, I wasn't sure if I had made the right choice. The guilt crept in, slowly, like a shadow creeping up behind me when I wasn't looking. It started small, just a nagging thought that maybe I had been too harsh with Sophie. After all, she was my sister, And no matter how frustrating she had been, she was still family. It wasn't like I didn't care about her. I did, but I was so tired. Tired of always being the one who sacrificed, who put others first, who let people take advantage of me. I thought about the conversations I had had with her over the last few months. I thought about the mess, the disrespect, the way she seemed to always take, but never give. Sophie had always been the one who got the easy way out. It was like the universe had handed her everything she ever wanted. And no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I struggled, I was always overlooked. Still, I couldn't deny that I missed her laughter, her presence. Even if it had become impossible to ignore how one-sided our relationship had become, there had been a time when Sophie and I were close. And now, it felt like something had broken beyond repair. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from my mom. "Can we talk? It's about Sophie. She's really struggling, and I think you need to give her more time." I stared at the screen for a long time, my heart sinking. The familiar guilt started to creep in again. Mom always had a way of making me feel like I was the one in the wrong. She had done it all my life, making excuses for Sophie, taking her side, and never truly understanding the weight of the sacrifices I had made. But this time, I wasn't going to be swayed. I didn't respond to the message. I couldn't bring myself to do it. There was nothing more to say. I had already made my decision, and I knew that if I replied, if I let myself get pulled back into their guilt trips, I'd never get out of the cycle. It wasn't long before my phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a message from Sophie. "I know you're mad at me, but I've been thinking, and I realize you're right. I messed up. I shouldn't have taken you for granted. I'm sorry." I stared at the text, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to believe her. After all, Sophie had never apologized like this before. She was always so quick to deflect blame, to make excuses for herself. But there was something about this message that felt different. Maybe, for the first time, she was truly realizing how much she had taken from me. But then I remembered all the times she had promised to change. All the times she had said things would be different, only to fall back into her old habits. I had been there for her time and time again, only to be met with disappointment. No, I couldn't fall for it again. I couldn't let her manipulate me into giving her another chance. I didn't reply to her message either. The silence stretched on, and I thought about how much I had changed since Sophie first moved in with me. In the beginning, I had been determined to help her, to be the supportive sister who always had her back. But over the months, I had realized just how much I had been losing my peace, my sense of self, and my ability to say no when it mattered most. I thought about the things I had given up to make space for Sophie. The late nights at work, the constant stress of keeping everything together, and the way I had ignored my own needs for the sake of someone who never truly appreciated it. I had spent so much time trying to hold everything together that I had forgotten what it felt like to take care of myself. I had forgotten what it meant to have boundaries, to prioritize my own well-being. It was hard to admit, but I knew deep down that I had enabled Sophie. By always being there for her, by always sacrificing for her, I had allowed her to avoid facing the consequences of her actions. And in doing so, I had created a cycle of dependence that neither of us could escape from. A few days passed, and then came another message from Mom. "Sophie is really struggling. She says she's trying to find a place, but she's scared. I know you're upset, but she's your sister. You have to help her." The message felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. I knew my mom meant well, but it was like she was asking me to go back to a place I didn't want to be anymore. Every time I got a message from her, it was like being pulled back into a past I had been trying to leave behind. A past where I was the one who always gave and never received. I didn't respond to my mom's message either. Instead, I set my phone down and took a deep breath. The decision I had made was final. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep enabling Sophie, and I couldn't keep letting my family guilt trip me into taking on responsibilities that weren't mine to bear. It was time for Sophie to face reality. She had to stand on her own 2 feet, and I had to learn how to take care of myself without feeling guilty about it. The days passed, and I didn't hear from Sophie again. There was a strange calm in the apartment now, a sense of finality that I hadn't expected. The tension had lifted, and while there was still a weight in my chest, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. But then, just as I had begun to think that maybe I had done the right thing, my phone buzzed again. It was from Sophie. "I don't have anywhere else to go. Please, I'm really struggling. You're my sister. I need you. I felt my stomach tighten. The words hit me harder than I had expected. Sophie had always been the one who made me feel like I had to help her, like I was the one who had to fix everything. And now, here she was, asking me to do it all over again. I stared at the message for a long time, the familiar guilt creeping up my throat. I wanted to respond, to let her back in, to be the person who always took care of her, but I couldn't. I couldn't go back to that place. I took a deep breath and typed my response slowly, carefully. I'm sorry, Sophie, but I'm done. You need to figure this out on your own. I've helped you more than enough, and I can't keep enabling you. You need to grow up. I hit send before I could second guess myself. For a long time, I sat there, staring at the screen. The silence that followed was different this time. There was no flood of apologies, no guilt trips, just emptiness. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. The days after I sent that final message were strange. The sense of relief I had been expecting didn't come immediately. Instead, it was replaced by an unsettling quiet, like I was in the eye of the storm, unsure of what the aftermath would look like. Sophie had left, but I was still haunted by the guilt, the lingering doubts that maybe I had made the wrong choice. My phone remained silent for the most part, and each time it buzzed, my heart would skip a beat, bracing for another text from Sophie or my mom, but nothing came. For the first time in months, I had space, physical space, emotional space, and yet the silence was deafening. I walked through the apartment, and it was as if the very walls were absorbing all the tension, leaving me with an eerie emptiness. I should have been enjoying this peace. I should have been reveling in the quiet that was finally mine after all the chaos Sophie had brought into my life. But instead, I found myself staring at the walls, wondering if I had done the right thing. Could I really leave Sophie to figure it all out on her own? Wasn't I supposed to be there for her as a sister? I had always been the one who kept things together, who put others before myself. And now, for the first time, I was choosing to take a step back. It was terrifying, honestly. It felt like I was abandoning her. And yet, deep down, I knew I couldn't keep going like I had been. I couldn't keep sacrificing my own peace, my own well-being for someone who didn't appreciate it. I didn't know how to move forward, how to make peace with the decision I had made. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sophie's face, the hurt, the confusion, but I also saw the same face from years of feeling neglected, unappreciated, and constantly pushed aside. I had been the one who always bent over backward to make things work. It was time for her to learn how to do that for herself. Then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. I don't know what you're doing, but I'm really worried about Sophie. She's not doing well. You need to fix this. I felt a lump form in my throat. I had known this moment was coming, but that didn't make it any easier to bear. Every time I had stood my ground, every time I had chosen my own peace, it felt like my family was asking me to undo all of it. My mom's words felt like another attempt to make me feel guilty, to bring me back into the chaos I had so carefully tried to escape. I read the message over and over again. I could feel the familiar pull, the guilt, the obligation to be there for Sophie. My mom's concern for Sophie was understandable, but it wasn't mine to carry anymore. It wasn't healthy for either of us to keep doing this, to keep enabling a cycle of dependence and manipulation. I had to let go, but the thought of actually saying it, of truly letting go, felt like cutting a part of me off. I set the phone down and went about my day, trying to keep myself distracted. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. There were no late-night arguments, no passive-aggressive comments. I had a sense of freedom, but it came with a weight that I couldn't shake. I had been living in the same cycle for so long, and now that I was on the other side of it, it didn't feel like the victory I had expected. It just felt empty. There was no fanfare, no sense of accomplishment, just an overwhelming silence that felt so alien to me. How had I gotten here? How had it come to this? A few hours later, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Sophie. I'm trying, okay? I'm really trying to figure this out. I don't have anyone else to turn to. Please, I'm begging you, just let me back in. I felt my heart tighten in my chest as I read her words. The plea was so familiar, so heartbreaking. It was the same thing she had always done: ask for forgiveness, promise things would change, then repeat the cycle. I knew what was coming next. This wasn't about her being sorry. It was about getting back into my life, where she could continue to avoid responsibility and keep taking without ever giving. I took a deep breath and put the phone down. I had already made my decision, but that didn't make it any easier to stick to. Sophie was my sister. I loved her, but that love wasn't enough to fix everything. I couldn't keep being the person who always picked up the pieces. I had spent so many years enabling her that I had forgotten what it felt like to have boundaries, to stand up for myself. I went to bed that night still processing the emotions swirling inside me. There was no perfect way to do this. There was no perfect answer, but for the first time, I wasn't backing down. I had chosen to protect myself, to stop being the crutch that kept everyone else standing while I crumbled underneath the weight of their problems. The next morning, I woke up with a newfound resolve. I wasn't going to let myself be pulled back into that cycle. I wasn't going to let my family or Sophie guilt trip me into making decisions that weren't healthy for me. I couldn't keep enabling this behavior. I picked up my phone, and after a moment of hesitation, I replied to Sophie's message. "I'm sorry, but I can't keep doing this. You need to figure things out on your own. I've helped you more than enough, and I can't keep enabling you. You need to take responsibility for yourself. I'm done." I hit send and set the phone down. This time, there was no hesitation, no second guessing. I had said what needed to be said, and for the first time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The decision had been made. Sophie had to learn how to stand on her own, and I had to learn how to let go. The silence that followed felt different this time. It wasn't the oppressive silence of guilt or uncertainty. It was a quiet that came from within, a quiet that meant peace was finally beginning to settle in. I wasn't sure what the future held for Sophie and me. I didn't know if things would ever go back to normal, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally putting myself first. It wasn't easy, it wasn't clean, but it was necessary. And for the first time, I felt like I was doing the right thing, not just for Sophie, but for myself. Days passed without a word from Sophie or my parents. I had expected more messages, more pleas, but nothing came. And as much as it hurt, I knew it was for the best. This time, there was no going back. I started to focus on myself again. I began to rebuild the life I had put on hold for so long. It was a slow process, but it was mine. And for the first time, it felt good to take things one day at a time without constantly worrying about everyone else. Sophie would have to find her way, and I would find mine. Story 2. A few days ago, I attended my best friend Sarah's baby shower, an event that I had been eagerly looking forward to. Sarah, 30, and I have been inseparable since our college days. We met freshman year when we were paired together as roommates, and it didn't take long for our friendship to blossom. We quickly realized we shared a love for music, especially live concerts. We spent hours discussing our favorite bands and attending shows, making countless memories along the way. By our senior year, we were practically inseparable, spending weekends together and visiting each other's families. After graduation, our lives took different directions while I landed a prestigious position at a law firm, something I had always dreamed of. Sarah ventured into social media, seeking a more flexible career. Despite our diverging paths, we made it a priority to spend time together. Whether it was hiking, dining out, or simply staying in and watching movies, we always found time for one another. It was during one of our girls' nights out that I met Michael, my husband. He was at a bachelor party, and from the moment we locked eyes, I knew he was the one. Although we joke about who fell in love first, we both know it was mutual that very night. Now, 5 years into our marriage, I can honestly say it has been nothing short of amazing. I often tell Sarah that if she hadn't dragged me out that night, I might have never met Michael. Sarah remained single for a while after I got married, but eventually, she met Mark, and the two of them hit it off. This year, they celebrated their second wedding anniversary. 3 months ago, Sarah called me with the exciting news that she was pregnant, and I couldn't have been happier for her. The thought of my best friend becoming a mom was thrilling, and I was honored when she asked me to organize her baby shower. She even named me godmother to her baby, which made me feel incredibly special. After brainstorming different themes, we settled on yellow, Sarah's favorite color. I coordinated with the caterer, ensuring everything was perfect for the big day. Fortunately, I had worked with the same caterer at my brother's wedding, so the process was smooth. On the day of the shower, Michael and I arrived a little early to help set up, and as we got settled, Mark greeted us. He let us know that Sarah was still getting ready, so we set to work arranging the decorations. I noticed that the cake wasn't centered on the table, just like Sarah had requested, so I fixed that. As the guests began to arrive, I was thrilled to see some of our college friends. It felt like old times, and we spent the afternoon catching up and reminiscing. Sarah looked radiant in a bright yellow dress, which fit perfectly with the shower theme. She had a huge smile on her face, and I couldn't help but feel so happy for her as she received congratulations from everyone around her. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until Sarah suddenly stood up and announced that she had a special message. She thanked everyone for coming and began speaking about her pregnancy, which everyone already knew. But then she took a deep breath and said something that immediately threw me off guard. She mentioned that she had someone special to thank for her pregnancy. Mark looked at her with confusion, clearly unaware of what was about to unfold. Then, in front of everyone, Sarah pointed directly at my husband, Michael, and said, "Everyone, I'd like to introduce the father of our baby." I was frozen. My heart skipped a beat. The room went silent, and I felt the color drain from my face. My mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. Michael, who is usually quiet and doesn't enjoy the spotlight, was holding my hand tightly under the table. I looked at him, and he looked just as bewildered as I was. We were both caught in this strange moment, not knowing what to do or how to react. I glanced around the room, and everyone was staring at us, unsure of how to respond. I turned to Sarah, hoping for some sort of explanation. For context, Michael and I had been trying to conceive for years without success. We had gone through countless tests, but there were medical issues preventing us from having children. It's something we had only shared with a handful of people, and Sarah was one of them. I was already hurt, but the public nature of her statement made everything worse. Sarah's words felt like a slap in the face. But just as I was processing the shock of it all, Sarah suddenly burst into laughter and nudged Mark, saying, "Guys, I'm just kidding. It's a prank. I've got cameras everywhere for Instagram." The awkward silence in the room was palpable. Some people nervously laughed, while others just sat there in disbelief. My emotions were a mixture of anger and confusion. How could Sarah think this was funny? Did she not understand how deeply her words had hurt me? I turned to look at Michael, and I could see the embarrassment on his face. He was red in the face, clearly uncomfortable. Sarah continued to laugh, but I could see that Mark wasn't amused. He looked visibly upset, and as I glanced around the room, I noticed that everyone was uncomfortable. Even Mark's reaction seemed to indicate that he didn't support this prank. He was staring at Sarah, clearly disappointed, and I could feel the tension in the air. Despite the discomfort, I didn't want to make a scene at her baby shower, so I stayed quiet. But I could tell that things weren't the same after that. We went through the motions, eating lunch, playing games, and opening gifts. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Sarah seemed to be the only one enjoying herself, chatting with guests and posting pictures for her social media. Meanwhile, Michael had already expressed his desire to leave, but I begged him to stay. I didn't want to make a scene or draw attention to our departure. Then, Mark stood up and, in a serious tone, asked Sarah if they could step outside for a moment. I knew something was about to go down. As soon as they were outside, we could hear their conversation. It started off low, but soon Mark's voice rose, and we all overheard him saying, "I can't believe you'd do something like this. This isn't just a joke. You've humiliated us both. You've ruined our baby shower." His words were sharp, and Sarah's defensiveness only seemed to escalate things. I glanced at Michael, who was visibly hurt and frustrated. Mark's anger only grew, and finally he shouted, "I'm done. I can't deal with your immaturity anymore. We're finished. I'll love the baby, but I can't be with you." At that moment, Sarah broke down in tears. Mark walked out, leaving her alone in the room. The shock of what had just happened hung in the air. I felt torn, while my heart ached for my best friend. I knew Michael needed me more in that moment. After the confrontation, I made the decision to leave the shower without saying goodbye. I wanted to be there for my husband, who was still clearly upset. When we got home, we both tried to process what had just happened. Neither of us could wrap our heads around Sarah's actions, especially after everything we had done for her. That evening, Mark sent us a text apologizing for what had happened. He explained that he had no idea Sarah was going to make such a public joke, and he regretted it. He wanted us to know that he understood how hurtful it was, and he wished he could have prevented it. I appreciated his apology, but I still couldn't shake the sting of Sarah's behavior. What was meant to be a joyful celebration had turned into a nightmare, and I wasn't sure how I could move forward from it. The days after the baby shower were a blur of emotions. I tried to stay composed, but everything felt off. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, how Sarah had humiliated us both, how her prank had hurt Michael and me in ways I never imagined. What she thought was funny, I saw as a cruel joke, especially given our struggles with fertility. It didn't make sense, and it wasn't something I could just brush off. Later that week, Sarah started texting me nonstop. At first, I thought maybe she was just feeling bad about the prank, hoping to apologize. But no, her messages only made things worse. She tried to justify her actions, claiming that the prank was just a stress-induced decision, a way to get a viral video for her Instagram. She even said she didn't understand why we were so upset and asked why I had left without saying goodbye, as if her public embarrassment of us was something we should laugh off. By then, I was already feeling overwhelmed. I had made it clear to her before that. I wasn't in the mood for her games, but she didn't seem to care. So I told her straight up that what she did wasn't funny. It was hurtful. It made both of us uncomfortable. And honestly, I needed some space. Her response caught me off guard, though. She called me a shitty friend for leaving her during such a vulnerable time. The audacity. That message hit harder than anything she had done at the shower. I had been there for her through everything, her breakups, her struggles, her ups and downs. I helped plan her baby shower, was going above and beyond to make it perfect for her. And now, she was calling me a bad friend? It stung. I showed the message to Michael, and we were both furious. But Michael, always the level-headed one, told me to ignore her and not get involved anymore. He was right. Sarah's behavior was out of line, and I had no reason to keep fighting for a friendship that felt one-sided. We both agreed that we needed to focus on each other, on our marriage, and our future. But it didn't stop there. Later that day, Sarah sent another message. But this time, it was directed at Michael. She accused him of trying to ruin our friendship and, in the same breath, insulted him by saying that he wasn't much of a man because he couldn't get me pregnant. I felt my blood boil reading that. Not only was she completely disrespecting our struggles with infertility, but she was also dragging Michael into her mess. It felt like she had no regard for our feelings whatsoever. I'm not going to lie, at that point, I'd had enough. I sent her one final message this time. It was clear and direct. I told her that until she took full responsibility for what she did and apologized to both of us, I wouldn't be speaking to her. I also made it clear that if she decided to post the prank video, I would take legal action against her. The way she had used our personal struggles for content wasn't just hurtful, it was borderline exploitative. She didn't respond to that message right away, but I could tell she was getting defensive. Then came the final blow. The email. It was long, nasty, and full of venom. Sarah accused me of being cheap, for not paying the full amount for the catering service, even though I had already paid half and planned to pay the rest after the shower. She also insulted me for being born into money and called me ugly, something I couldn't even understand. She insinuated that Michael had only married me for my money, claiming I was too ugly to be with him otherwise. The whole email was full of profanities, insults, and accusations. I showed it to Michael, and he lost it. Over the years, we had helped Sarah out in so many ways, from flying her to vacations to lending a hand with her parents. Yet here she was, calling us all kinds of names. It was beyond hurtful. We were stunned by her behavior, but we didn't want to give her any more of our time or energy. So we decided to take action. Michael reached out to Mark, Sarah's husband. I could tell Mark was just as shocked and disgusted by Sarah's behavior as we were. In fact, he had his own set of disturbing messages to share. Sarah had been sending him the same kind of hateful messages she'd sent us. She had accused him of cheating on her, which was completely unfounded. Mark had been in contact with a divorce lawyer, and it seemed like their marriage was unraveling fast. Mark, who had always been close with Michael, came over to our place, and we all sat down to discuss things. We showed him the email, and the look on his face said it all. He couldn't believe what he was reading. He had never expected Sarah to go this far. He also showed us some of the messages she had sent him, accusing him of cheating and just generally attacking him. The situation was quickly spiraling out of control. Mark made it clear that he had no intentions of reconciling with Sarah at this point. The prank at the baby shower had been the last straw, and he felt betrayed by her actions. He was done, and as hard as it was, he was filing for divorce. The level of hostility and manipulation Sarah had shown was something Mark wasn't willing to tolerate any longer, and I couldn't blame him. After Mark left, I took a deep breath. This situation had turned into a nightmare, but in a way, I also felt a sense of relief. I knew that I couldn't keep going back and forth with Sarah. I had done everything I could for her, and in the end, it wasn't enough. She had changed into someone unrecognizable, someone I couldn't trust or be friends with anymore. It's been a few weeks now, and Sarah's behavior still haunts me, but I've decided that it's not worth letting it affect my marriage or my happiness. Michael and I are stronger than ever, and we've been focusing on our future. We're still figuring out how to deal with the fallout, but we're doing it together, and that's what matters. I never thought I'd be in this position. Losing a best friend is never easy, especially when that friend becomes a different person right before your eyes. But at the end of the day, I know that Michael and I are better off without the toxicity she brought into our lives. It's a hard lesson learned, but it's a lesson all the same. I've had messages from mutual friends asking about Sarah, some even suggesting she might be dealing with neurological issues due to the sudden changes in her behavior. While I don't think that's the case, Sarah has always had a temper problem. I did reach out to her parents. We shared everything with them, including the texts and emails she had sent. They were concerned, but ultimately, it's up to them to handle it from here. As for me, I've moved on. I've blocked Sarah's number and deleted her email from my inbox. I'm focusing on the life I've built with Michael and our dogs, and we're looking forward to the future. The Maldives trip we took a few weeks ago was exactly what we needed: some time to disconnect, relax, and recharge. We're still as in love as we were when we first met, and we're not going to let this drama take away from that. Mark and Sarah have officially divorced, and while it was a messy process, it seems like things are settling down. Mark has been supportive of the baby, but he's made it clear he wants nothing to do with Sarah anymore. As for Sarah, she's been trying to reach out to me through other channels, but I've had enough. I'm done with the drama, and I'm ready to focus on my life, my marriage, and the happiness that we've worked so hard to build. It's a shame it took all of this to get there, but I'm thankful that Michael and I came out stronger for it. Looking back, I can see now that I shouldn't have ignored the red flags with Sarah all those years. But I'm not going to dwell on the past. Life is too short for that. I wish her well, but I have to move on. So, here's to a new chapter. A chapter with my husband, and the peace of knowing that we're doing things right together.